woman from Jalisco rise to command a $200 million empire under America's radar, and why did no one see her coming? The quiet streets of Chicago's South Side hid the pulse of an invisible war. Inside nondescript warehouses, forklifts hummed under sodium lights, moving barrels labeled industrial salt. But behind the packaging, there was poison methamphetamine oil firearms and evidence of a global network that stretched from Mexico to the American Midwest. At its center stood a figure known to both intelligence circles and cartel enforcers as La Diabla, the devil in plain sight. For years, her face lingered on intelligence boards in Mexico City and Washington. Her name, Martha Alicia Mendez Aguilar, appeared in classified briefings next to coded shipments, encrypted wallets, and intercepted radio traffic. According to Reuters and BBC Archives, CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, had already overtaken Sinaloa as the dominant exporter of meth and fentanyl to the United States by 2023. Yet few realized that its new operational brain had already crossed north, embedding herself within the very arteries of American commerce. Her brilliance was structural, not theatrical. Unlike past cartel figures who thrived on brutality, La Diabla built an empire on silence. Freight records from CBP and investigative data cited by The Guardian reveal a seamless logistics pipeline running from Ciudad Juarez to Chicago, disguised beneath legitimate trade. Sea salt, fertilizer, cleaning supplies, every cargo a Trojan horse. Inside modified polymer drums concealed liquid precursors, their density altered just enough to fool X-ray scanners. Analysts from Jane's Defense Weekly later noted that her operations mimicked paramilitary supply chains, combining civilian shipping with encrypted military-grade tracking. Behind the smuggling was a deeper menace, a dual-purpose infrastructure. Official documents, now declassified, hint at a parallel trade human trafficking and organ harvesting. The use of surgical equipment found in Juarez mirrored what investigators would uncover in Chicago months later. What began as a narcotics empire had evolved into something darker, a transnational enterprise blurring the line between organized crime and terrorism. By 2024, American intelligence had designated CJNG under hybrid threat protocols, a category once reserved for groups like Hezbollah or ISIS. The cartel no longer operated as criminals, but as strategists weaponizing the US economy's open arteries. In that same year, as tensions flared between Israel and Iran, and as Russia's war in Ukraine intensified, President Trump's administration authorized sweeping surveillance powers under a new Homeland Security directive, one that linked cartel activity to national security. Analysts compared the scale of La Diabla's logistics to wartime supply operations. According to Defense News, her network managed over 60 shell companies across North America, routing funds through cryptocurrency and agricultural exports. Every route that moved drugs north also ferried weapons south. The FBI would later call it the revolving corridor, an invisible front line of America's war at home. But beyond intelligence cables and seizure reports lies the human story, the pregnant women trafficked under false promises, the factory workers unknowingly handling barrels filled with death, the families shattered on both sides of the border. Chicago became more than a city. It became a battlefield in a global contest between freedom and order. As dawn broke over, the Windy City federal agents whispered the same question through encrypted radios, not if they could catch her, but how she had survived so long inside the world's most watched nation. If a single woman could turn America's trade arteries into a war machine, what else might be hiding in plain sight? The blueprint of La Diabla's empire read like a military operations manual. Each corridor was a lifeline, methamphetamine north, firearms south, forming a self-sustaining ecosystem of crime. The FBI later named it the revolving corridor, a phrase that chilled even veteran investigators. Every truckload, every crate, every digital transaction was a move on a chessboard invisible to the public, but monitored by satellites, custom scanners, and human informants spread from Laredo to Chicago. The structure was precise. Freight trucks departed from warehouses in Guadalajara under falsified agricultural manifests. Their barrels labeled sea salt carried narcotic oil. On arrival in the Midwest, their contents were processed in converted industrial facilities, chemical plants reborn as narcotics refineries. Then, as the cycle reversed, other vehicles carried undeclared firearms southward, hidden inside shipments of toys, fertilizer, or textiles. It was a perfect symmetry, a two-way war economy between America's streets and Mexico's battlefields. Reports from Reuters and Al Jazeera confirmed that by late 2024, this corridor accounted for nearly 40% of all methamphetamine entering the United States. Yet it wasn't brute force that made it unstoppable, it was data. Each load was tracked with encrypted GPS devices, some hidden in coolers or welded into frames, giving La Diabla's handlers real-time insight into every convoy's progress. BBC analysts later revealed that her engineers had developed anti-scanning polymers to deceive X-ray inspections, a technique reminiscent of smuggling methods used by Russian private arms dealers in Eastern Europe. Federal agencies soon realized they weren't dealing with traffickers, they were dealing with logisticians. Jane's Defense Weekly called it cartel militarization through commerce. The same logistics models used by NATO supply chains or Chinese maritime operations were being adapted for narcotics. It was no longer about smuggling, it was about control of flow, terrain, and timing. At the heart of this industrial machine stood La Diabla herself, invisible, fluent in economics, and ruthless in enforcement. Witnesses from DW's investigative unit described her leadership as algorithmic. Orders passed through layers of proxy contractors and false executives, all bound by digital silence. Each layer was replaceable. If one courier fell, another took its place within hours. This redundancy made her network almost indestructible. But what elevated her from a criminal to a geopolitical threat was the fusion of commerce and warfare. Her system's two-way traffic mirrored the world's greatest conflicts. In Ukraine, Western defense analysts noted how drones, ammunition, and black market arms followed similar shadow logistics lines. In the Persian Gulf, Israeli and Iranian proxies fought over maritime routes where oil tankers disguised military cargo. Across the Pacific, the US and China wrestled for dominance over semiconductor supply chains, a contest of logistics, not ideology. The revolving corridor was America's mirror proof that in a globalized world, the tools of trade could become the tools of war. As dawn approached each day in Chicago's industrial district, shipments crossed the border undetected. Every delivery strengthened the illusion of normalcy, while the quiet hum of forklifts carried the rhythm of a hidden empire. Within these walls, America's open market became a weapon against itself, precision engineered by a woman who understood its weaknesses better than any general. The question haunting federal briefings wasn't just how to catch her, it was darker. Could the same global system that built prosperity now sustain organized crime at the level of a sovereign state? The answer, buried in encrypted ledgers and forgotten manifests, would soon explode in Chicago's South Side, where America's invisible war would finally step into the light. It began with an anomaly, a truck that shouldn't have been there. On a cold January night in 2025, a freight vehicle crossed from Laredo into Illinois, pinging a suspicious GPS pattern. It wasn't random, it was rhythmic, looping the same coordinates every 21 days. That repetition would ignite Operation Sigma, one of the most intricate federal missions since 9/11. The data trail came from CBP's Freight Integrity Program and cyber forensic units working under the FBI's Counter-Narcotics and Counter-Terrorism Task Force. Their findings confirmed what many had feared. CJNG's Chicago network wasn't a cartel extension, it was a parallel economy. Dozens of fake logistics companies, cryptocurrency transfers tied to Mexican shell accounts, and shipping manifests signed by ghosts. Under President Trump's directive in early 2025, Homeland Security merged intelligence streams from FBI, DEA, CBP, and the U.S. Marshal Service into a single strike apparatus Joint Task Force Sigma. Drawing from military doctrine used in counterinsurgency, Sigma's mission wasn't merely to seize drugs, it was to map the network's digital bloodstream. The first clue came from the Department of Defense's Project Helios, a surveillance program monitoring suspicious supply patterns. Analysts noticed encrypted wallets sending micropayments to fuel stations along known cartel routes, payments that aligned with exact truck mileage. Using satellite telemetry from defense news-reported sources, Sigma analysts realized those transfers were not for gas. They were confirmation signals, proof that every mile was being logged by cartel operatives. To dismantle La Diabla's fortress, investigators needed to infiltrate her system, not storm it. Covert agents embedded at freight yards around South Archer Avenue, using drones disguised as maintenance units, and fiber optic cameras installed inside light fixtures. For weeks, the footage streamed silently into Sigma's command room. Forklifts moved drums labeled Salt 11, AZ 14, and Cold 7, the same designations found in seizures across Oregon and Texas. Then the breakthrough forensic analysts traced the shipment's financial paper trail to a Delaware shell firm named Grupo Rocafria Freight, identical to one listed in a 2023 Reuters expose on Mexican laundering front companies. Within its ledgers lay $200 million in coded transfers linking to cryptocurrency exchanges in Panama and Merida. The pattern matched La Diabla's own digital fingerprint, her alias La Medica, known in intelligence circles as the architect of hybrid logistics. Parallel to the investigation, DW reported rising Mexican border seizures of US-made rifles and ammunition traced back to Illinois. Each intercepted shipment mirrored inbound narcotics traffic. For every ton of methamphetamine moving north, thousands of rounds of ammunition went south. The symmetry stunned analysts at Jane's Defense Weekly, who compared it to Cold War proxy trade systems, where arms and goods crossed invisible boundaries to maintain geopolitical leverage. But Operation Sigma wasn't just a law enforcement campaign, it was a test of sovereignty. With American streets flooded by cartel drugs and foreign weapons returning to Mexican soil, the mission became a question of national endurance. Could the US reclaim control over its own logistical arteries? In confidential memos leaked to the Guardian agents, described the tone in Washington as warlike. Trump's Security Council authorized advanced drones and biometric scanners under new emergency orders. For the first time, narcotics networks were being tracked like insurgent militias. America was applying wartime intelligence to its domestic soil. The interagency system was ready. What remained was the strike. Sigma would deploy 4 tactical teams each, with overlapping zones, surveillance, and breach authority. The target, a nondescript warehouse with no municipal record, no trash collection, and no visible staff. To outsiders, it was another forgotten building in Chicago's industrial belt, but to the agents watching from afar, it was the beating heart of La Diabla's empire. As drones hovered over Archer Avenue, one analyst whispered what everyone in the control room already knew: if we hit this wrong, it won't be a bust, it'll be a war. At 03:15 a.m., the wind off Lake Michigan howled through Chicago's Southside industrial zone. Steam rose from sewer grates. The city slept unaware that in one warehouse, a battle was about to erupt that would redefine America's war on organized crime. Joint Task Force Sigma's command vans were parked 3 blocks away. Inside, glowing monitors displayed live thermal feeds. Drones circled overhead, their infrared lenses marking silhouettes moving between trucks and forklifts. The FBI's Alpha and Bravo units stood ready to breach. Their mission: capture Martha Alicia Mendez Aguilar, alias La Diabla, alive. The operation had been rehearsed for weeks, its choreography drawn from counterterrorism doctrine. At 02:47, Sigma intercepted encrypted chatter Spanish voices, confirming the cargo is sealed. Command gave the green light. Execute Sigma 1. The first charge shattered the night. Explosive hinges blew open the main gate, while flashbangs turned darkness into chaos. Inside, masked gunmen scrambled for weapons. FBI entry logs later described 2 assailants firing AK-103 variants with armor-piercing rounds. The firefight lasted 29 seconds. When it was over, silence returned except for the hiss of smoke grenades and the heavy boots of advancing agents. Within minutes, teams fanned out across the compound. What they found went far beyond narcotics. Pallets of barrels marked industrial salt were stacked ceiling high. One drum leaked a viscous chemical later confirmed as methamphetamine precursor. Nearby, an improvised command center displayed satellite uplinks, encrypted laptops, and digital ledgers mirroring cryptocurrency flows traced earlier by Sigma's analysts. Then came the discovery that stunned even veteran agents: a hydraulic lift leading to a hidden sub-basement. Down there, under flickering lights, stood stainless steel surgical tables, refrigeration units, and genetic sampling kits. Federal investigators realized they were looking at the operational link between CJNG's narcotics empire and its alleged organ trafficking division. For the first time, evidence physically connected 2 criminal worlds: drugs and human exploitation. At 03:12 a.m., Bravo team breached a reinforced office. Behind the steel door stood La Diabla herself, unarmed, calm, flanked by 2 bodyguards holding suppressed pistols. A flashbang disoriented the room. Seconds later, she was on the ground, restrained without injury. Facial recognition confirmed her identity. After years of myth, the most elusive woman in Mexico's underworld had fallen in an American city. By dawn, Reuters, BBC, and Al Jazeera broke the story FBI ambush captures CJNG's female financier in Chicago. The world watched as armored vehicles rolled out of Archer Avenue carrying a prisoner whose empire had stretched across 3 nations. Inside the warehouse, forensic teams cataloged the haul: $200 million in narcotics, 10 tons of weapons, 32 encrypted drives, and dozens of ledgers recording cryptocurrency transactions that linked US shell companies to Mexican accounts. Analysts at DW described the bust as a modern-day Normandy, not for its scale of violence, but for the intelligence precision that led to it. Defense News later revealed that Sigma's sensors use thermal mapping and radio triangulation, normally reserved for battlefield operations. The implications were profound. For Washington, the raid was proof that America could project counter-cartel power as decisively as it once did against foreign insurgents. But for critics, the ambush raised another question: if the government can deploy counterterrorism tactics on domestic soil, where is the line between protection and overreach? As dawn bled into the Chicago skyline, La Diabla sat handcuffed in an armored SUV, eyes fixed on the horizon. Agents reported her whispering a single phrase in Spanish: "You cut off one head, another grows." The city awoke to sirens flashing lights and headlines that rippled across the world. FBI captures cartel queen in Chicago, 200 million seized. For many, it was a victory story. For others, it was an alarm bell. Within hours of La Diabla's arrest, DEA and CBP teams launched synchronized raids in Texas, California, and Illinois, uncovering warehouses, ledgers, and accounts linked to her shadow empire. The fallout was immediate and enormous. According to Reuters, federal prosecutors froze over $235 million in assets within 2 weeks, much of it tied to cryptocurrency accounts and offshore firms in Panama and Belize. The seizures crippled CJNG's Midwestern operations overnight, but this was no ordinary financial takedown. Each account revealed coded communications with freight companies, customs brokers, and even American logistics firms unknowingly caught in her network. The FBI called it the spider's web because every thread led to another shell and another city. Across the border, Al Jazeera reported raids in Guadalajara, Veracruz, and Juarez, where Mexican Marines stormed compounds linked to organ trafficking operations. 18 women were rescued. Surgical instruments identical to those found in Chicago were seized. For the first time, hard evidence tied a US-based cartel cell to human experimentation and medical exploitation. Mexican prosecutors called it a nightmare written in ledger form. But beyond the sensational headlines, something deeper was unfolding: a strategic realignment. Under President Trump's renewed Homeland Security Directive, Joint Task Force Sigma was upgraded into a permanent interagency strike division, merging FBI, DEA, ATF, and Cyber Command assets. According to DW, it was the most aggressive domestic intelligence integration since the Patriot Act. America was shifting from reactive raids to continuous warfare against transnational cartels. The U.S. Congress, pressed by mounting public outrage, began debating new legislation treating high-level cartel activity as foreign hybrid warfare, not traditional organized crime. The Guardian wrote that this doctrine blurred the boundary between criminal law and national defense, a reflection of modern warfare where syndicates act like states with economies, armies, and global reach. Meanwhile, inside federal holding cells, La Diabla's silence became her weapon. She refused to speak during interrogation, communicating only through attorneys. Yet her seized hard drives spoke volumes, detailing transactions that revealed collusion with corrupt customs officers at multiple border crossings. Those officials were later indicted their cooperation, explaining how entire truck convoys had moved through checkpoints unscanned. Experts at Jane's Defense Weekly drew stark comparisons to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, where private contractors and proxy logistics mirror cartel networks. Both rely on decentralized cells, encrypted communications, and financial camouflage. In the Middle East, Defense News noted similar methods among Iranian-backed militias, using commercial shipments to conceal arms transfers. And in the Pacific, the US-China rivalry was playing out in cyberspace through the same algorithms used by traffickers' supply chain dominance as power projection. Amid global instability, the Chicago ambush became more than a law enforcement milestone. It became a symbol. America's war on cartels was now indistinguishable from its wars on terror, cybercrime, and espionage. Yet within the success, unease lingered. Civil rights advocates questioned whether counterterrorism tools belonged in domestic policing. Could digital surveillance, drones, and AI analysis once used against foreign enemies now be aimed at American soil without eroding liberty? Still, for the families broken by fentanyl overdoses, or the mothers in Juarez mourning their disappeared daughters, justice had finally arrived, wrapped in federal blue. As La Diabla's trial loomed, prosecutors prepared to unveil 200 exhibits and 128 pages of evidence. The case promised to expose not only one woman's empire, but the anatomy of a modern hybrid cartel, one as adaptable as any army, as ruthless as any ideology. But the question hung heavy in every corridor of Washington. If the United States has to fight cartels like insurgents, how long before it starts living like a nation at war? The courtroom lights in downtown Chicago glared like interrogation lamps. Reporters filled every seat as Martha Alicia Mendez Aguilar La Diabla was led in unshackled, expressionless, surrounded by marshals in tactical gear. Outside, demonstrators gathered with signs reading "Justice for Juarez" and "Stop the Cartel War." Inside, prosecutors prepared to reveal the anatomy of a criminal empire that had shaken America's sense of security to its core. Over 4 months, federal witnesses, cyber experts, undercover agents, forensic accountants described how La Diabla's network moved more than $500 million across 3 continents using blockchain wallets and shell companies. BBC and Reuters reporters noted how jurors gasped when agents unveiled digital ledgers showing medical equipment purchases from European suppliers disguised as agricultural orders. Even more disturbing was testimony from survivors rescued in Juarez who described the cartel's false promises of employment and the horror that followed. But beyond the courtroom drama, a greater transformation was underway. Under directives signed by President Trump, Joint Task Force Sigma evolved into a permanent interagency command uniting domestic law enforcement with cyber command and intelligence assets. According to Defense News, the doctrine was clear: cartels were no longer to be treated as gangs, but as non-state combatants. It was a profound redefinition of American security strategy. Analysts from DW and The Guardian observed that this shift mirrored patterns seen in Ukraine and the Middle East, where hybrid warfare blurred lines between state and criminal actors. Cartels, they argued, had become the Western Hemisphere's insurgencies, self-financed, digitally armed, and globally networked, and the US, like any superpower, was adapting. Meanwhile, in Mexico, the fallout from La Diabla's arrest reshaped CJNG's power structure. Intelligence from Al Jazeera's Latin desk reported infighting among her former lieutenants. One faction led by Ricardo LRR Velasco seized her former smuggling corridors. Another, the Los Canones faction, turned violent, triggering assassinations from Colima to Zacatecas. The violence underscored what Washington's analysts already feared: a cartel doesn't die when its queen falls, it mutates. To combat this, the US and Mexico signed a new bilateral security framework to replace the outdated Merida Initiative. The new accord emphasized cyber forensics, AI-assisted financial tracking, and cross-border rapid response teams modeled directly after Sigma's command structure. For the first time, both nations acknowledged that cartel warfare had entered the digital era. Yet even as governments adapted, traffickers evolved faster. In mid-2025, CBP intercepted shipments of meth hidden in pet food paint barrels and refrigerated fruit, small fragmented loads impossible to trace with traditional methods. The cartels had learned their lesson: decentralize disguise and dissolve into civilian trade. Still, amid the chaos, the operation's legacy remained clear. The capture of La Diabla proved that patience, intelligence fusion, and technological precision could pierce even the most sophisticated criminal networks. It demonstrated that America's greatest weapon wasn't brute force, it was information. But it also exposed a haunting paradox. To protect liberty, the nation had expanded surveillance. To secure freedom, it had blurred the line between police and soldier. As drones patrolled the skies and AI scanned trade data, America's frontier between safety and freedom grew thin. The trial ended with multiple life sentences. La Diabla showed no emotion as the verdict was read. Outside, families of victims wept. The judge's gavel fell, but the echo felt like a warning, not an ending. In a world where wars are waged through data, drugs, and dollars, what separates justice from power? And when the next La Diabla rises hidden in the circuitry of global trade, will the world even see her coming? The capture of Martha Alicia Mendez Aguilar, known as La Diabla, marked one of the most significant law enforcement victories in modern US history. Her rise within the Jalisco New Generation Cartel transformed narcotics trafficking into a high-tech paramilitary enterprise that infiltrated America's economic arteries. Through encrypted networks, cryptocurrency laundering, and dual-flow smuggling drugs, north weapons south, her empire blurred the boundary between organized crime and hybrid warfare. The FBI's Operation Sigma, backed by President Trump's national security directives, united intelligence agencies in an unprecedented domestic strike. The raid in Chicago exposed $200 million in drugs, 10 tons of weapons, and a secret medical facility tied to human trafficking. Her arrest sparked international reforms, driving both Washington and Mexico to adopt counter-cartel doctrines akin to counterterrorism. But as AI surveillance and cyber warfare expand, America faces a dilemma: how to defend freedom without dismantling it. The La Diabla case wasn't just about one woman, it was a warning that in the global age, the battlefield is everywhere, and the enemy may already be inside the system.